Grand Rising, Great Dawning. Welcome to another edition of Open Door with Vince Robinson. I have a very special guest with me today. He is a comedian and I guess you could say he's an activist of sorts because he's involved in some nonprofit goings on out there in California. We're going to tell you all about that and what the future of that looks like in a few moments. But first, let me introduce you to Mr. Donald Lacy Jr. Mr. Lacy, welcome.
What's going on, good brother? Good to see you, brother Vince. Long time.
Long time. It's been since August of 2022. We were together in Playa del Carmen, Mexico for a Qigong retreat. And I know folks can't look at us and think, oh man, those two guys, they do Qigong. But we do. I know it wasn't your first time experiencing the magic of Qigong through our brother Wayne B. Chandler. So you were there and you were already a step ahead of the game. You know, some of us novices, new to the game, were learning what we were learning, but it was a wonderful time. And I know it serves you well. And I do what I can to share the ministry of Qigong to folks. But I want to introduce you to the world as a comedian. And I know you're very well connected. I've seen some of your shows. And since we're connected now, I get to see all the wonderful things that you're doing on Facebook as well. You shared with us that one of your good friends is Lunel.
Yeah.
And Lunel is going to be here in Cleveland in just a few short weeks. So again, welcome. And I'm really happy to have this conversation with you. So we'll just start and do the normal question. You know, folks will ask you, well, how did you get into comedy? So I'll start with that stupid question, and then we'll explore some more profound things.
Well, first of all, go see my girl Linnell. We went to high school together. And yeah, just tell her you know me, and I guarantee you'll get a reaction on her face. That's number one. But yeah, man, I got into acting first, 1983. I did my first professional play, and then I wasn't making no money. In fact, my late great father was teasing me because I thought I was doing good. I was getting $10 a show, and when I showed him that check, he laughed. He said, "Boy, you went to college to get $10 a show? You's a damn fool." So I had a job at the Recreation Center for the Handicapped, where we worked with mentally ill, developmentally disabled able adults. In fact, we were one of the first behavior mod programs in the country, and we wanted to do a talent show with the clients, and I got to MC. And growing up in Oakland, you always had to be quick witted. We played the dozens, man, and man, it was some Hall of Fame dozen players. So growing up in the mean streets of Oakland, I learned how to sharpen my wit. And then, once I started doing comedy, man, I had the pleasure to learn from some of the greats, including the late great Paul Mooney. I could go on and name. I got to work one time with the late great Robin Harris. So yeah, I've been blessed, man, to work with some really good people and learn the craft.
Yeah, you mentioned Paul Mooney. It's a small world. Our brother Wayne Chandler is connected with his sons, the twins.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and they're actually involved in something that is near and dear to both of us, and that's cryptocurrency and forex. And they're doing quite well with it. I mean, they're making literally thousands and thousands of dollars a week. So we're kind of working with them to spread the good word about the thing that folks are so scared of. But there's no reason to fear it. Jump in, embrace it, and enrich yourself if you know what you're doing. So it's a beautiful thing. And we actually did a couple of meetings with the Mooney twins a few months back. So it was good to see them and good to know that they're doing quite well. So you've been in comedy for quite some time, but you mentioned that you were an actor. And I know based on the time that we spent together, that you've been in plays, and I think you also write. Talk about your theatrical experience.
Yeah, well, thanks for that, man. And I'm still acting. In fact, I'm a member of the greatest theater company in the world, if I can use that hyperbole, Campo Santo, which means sacred ground. And, I've worked with the great, who's a dear friend of mine, Roger Guinevere Smith, who people know as Mookie from Do the Right Thing. But the brother is a brilliant solo performer. He did the Huey Newton story that Spike Lee turned into a great movie. Man, I've had the pleasure, and I do mean pleasure, to meet and sit down and have dinner with the late great August Wilson. And I've done, let's see, I did Gem of the Ocean, did a piano lesson, and I did Jitney. Those three plays. And yeah, man, I mean, I just love the craft. I've had the plan. The first film I ever did was a movie that was whatever, starring the late great Robin Williams, Jack, where he had this disease and he was a little kid, but he aged like an adult. And I got the pleasure to work with Francis Ford Coppola. I mean, just a G in the game. And, I was a background actor, whatever. And the first day there, all the other actors was, playing grab booty and trying to rap to the girls and doing all that. But I was watching the masters set up his shots. And I'll never forget, he said, "Hey, young fella, you're interested in this stuff." I said, "Yes, sir, Mr. Coppola." He said, "You know what? I'm going to keep you around for the whole week." And he let me watch and see him work with his first and second ADs. And I was really kind of him, man. And then I got to do a scene with just me, Robin, and another actor that made the final cut. So, yeah, man, I'm just a student of the game. I just love the craft. I love writing. I've had the pleasure to, work with some of the greatest writers to ever walk the earth. In Tazaki Shange, rest in power, the late great Dennis Johnson, and on and on. So I'm blessed, man, to be able to do what I love and love what I do.
Okay. And how was it that, if you can call it that, making a transition from doing the theatrical stuff into the world of comedy?
Man, it was comedy for me. There's a comedian I'm going to name that a lot of people, except those of us in the business, don't know. And his name was David Allen Moss. He used to go by D. Allen Moss. And he told me, he said, "Man, you're like me in some ways, and I want to challenge you. Is it's easy for you, huh?" And yeah, in some ways it is. And don't get it twisted. I'm not saying stand up is easy, because it ain't. There's an old saying in theater: death is hard, comedy is harder. But if you have a natural affinity for just being humorous and being yourself, which I've always had, it wasn't that hard for me to make that transition. And my acting training, helped me connect with audiences easier, to have stage presence, to be able to improv. You know, a lot of comedians do routines. I do routines, but for me, every show I've ever done in 30 years now of stand up, I like to improv. It just keeps it fresh, keeps it fun. And then when the audience knows you're coming off the top of your head, it's even funnier. So every show I do, I always add improv into the mix. So, it's kind of like theater and comedy for me go hand in hand.
So if you could, there's a trajectory that is involved in comedy. I mean, you don't start off headlining.
Right.
I guess there's kind of a dues paying process that goes along with the job. Can you talk about how you started and where you are now with respect to that?
Yeah, well, the first time I ever got on stage, and my acting training, I had my whole routine memorized, and I killed. And I was like, "Oh, okay, yeah." Second time I got on stage, I ate it. I bombed miserably, and then the third time, I bombed miserably, and then I was okay the fourth or fifth time. Had in the first couple of years, you're learning, what to do and what not to do. You got to be able to read the room. If you don't do the same material for a church show that you do for a nightclub, excuse me, or what's known as a blue room where you can, MF and say whatever you want. So you got to learn all that. And you start out as an MC pretty much, or just a guest setter, 5 to 10 minutes. And then you build up to a feature act, which is 20 to 25 to 30 minutes. And then you become a headliner, which is 45 to an hour. And I've been headlining now for over 20 years. But, depending on what the show is in LA, everybody gets 10 minutes, unless you're Richard Pryor, rest in peace, or somebody like that, then they give you as long as you want. But you only get, 7 to 10 minutes in any room, almost from the Comedy Store to the Improv, Comedy Chateau, wherever you might be performing. That's just the way it goes down. But yeah, there's definitely steps to the game. And, even the great Richard Pryor, I saw him. There's an obscure video of his, and I think it's called Live and Smoking, in this little bitty room in New York City somewhere, maybe, Brooklyn or wherever it was. And it wasn't that funny. It was very revealing, but some people would say he bombed. So if even the greatest of all time, one of the greatest of all time, arguably, who whatever your taste is, he happens to be my favorite, you know, that's part of it. So you're only as good as your last show. And he said something that I never forgot in this documentary that I encourage anybody that loves comedy to see. It's called Omit the Logic. And David Banks, rest in peace, who I got to meet in LA years ago, who used to write for him and be around him and do shows with him, who was a great comedy mind, along with Paul Mooney. Everybody knew that part, right? But he said that when Richard would come off stage and he would just kill it. And then he'd say, "Yeah, man, you killed that." And he'd say, "It's all about tomorrow." So he never really reveled in his success, or even, lamented any shows that weren't top notch. In fact, there's a great story about that great comedy concert he did live on the Sunset Strip. And I know people who were there when he did that. I wasn't there. I wasn't even in comedy back then. I was in the 70s. I was in high school. But I knew somebody, an older guy I knew, who went and told me this years later. In fact, he was working security along with Rashad, who was Richard Pryor's bodyguard, right, for most of his career, if not all of his career. And he said, man, the first night and they were filming, and it was horrible. And I think this is in a mythologic, if I remember. But then the next night he came back, and it was brilliant. So hey, the comedy, man, it's an art form. It's an evolving art form. The sad thing about it now, in this politically correct, watch what you say age, people are too sensitive. But, for me, if I can't feel like I'm free on stage to express my First Amendment rights, then I'm not enjoying myself.
Yeah. So let's dive a little bit more into that when we get back, because I really am interested in your perspective on that. You're listening to Open Door with Vince Robinson on 95.9 FM WOVU. My guest is comedian Donald Lacy Jr. We'll be right back on this Burton Bell Car Community Radio Station. Welcome back to Open Door with Vince Robinson. I am joined by Donald Lacy Jr. He is a comedian doing big things out there on the West Coast, the East Coast, and all places in between. Yeah, you were just talking about this new age that we seem to be living in, this age of political correctness, and you're talking about the impact that it has had on your comedy. How have you seen things change since you started, and where we are with respect to the material that you can do now?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, a lot of, especially after, the whole COVID situation and Me Too, which, hey, any dude that, makes untoward advances or sexually assaults a woman, okay, you deserve everything you get. However, if I just say hello to you, how are you today? I don't expect a call from your lawyer, Mr. Rubenstein, or whoever, saying that I did something untoward because I just was being friendly and said hello. So there's that fine line you got to walk, right? So for me, I mean, I've always been perceptive in terms of, feeling out audiences. And like I said, I usually go on last or towards the end. So I watch all the other comics and see, what works for them, what doesn't work. If this audience is too stiff about sexuality, as some audiences are, about race. I do a lot of stuff about race and politics. I have a whole one man show about it, Color Struck, right? That deals with the history of institutionalized racism. So for me, again, I try to be smart, with what I say, because words do have power. Words can have repercussions, as we're finding out. But, some people just can't take a joke. I mean, if we start splitting hairs about you can joke about everything but this, then do we really want to go down that slippery slope? Because then, it becomes a freedom of speech issue. And, I'm a staunch defender of the First Amendment. It's one of my favorite things about America. America's got a lot of problems, but allegedly, as long as you're not yelling fire in a crowded theater, you have the right via the First Amendment to say how you feel. But it seems now we've, as a country, have gravitated to it's free speech, but watch what you say. And to me, that's not what the First Amendment is about. I mean, a lot of people, from the Alex Joneses to the Tucker Carlsons and all of them, I support their right to say stupid stuff, right? So we can't start saying freedom of speech for somebody and freedom of speech except for them. No, it's got to be freedom of speech for everybody or freedom of speech for nobody. So we really, as a society, need to toughen up and take a joke. I mean, you can't take a joke. Come on now. And sure, some jokes are mean spirited and hurtful, and I never have been that guy. I'm gonna be edgy, but I ain't gonna be, I never liked that whole mama jokes thing that was in the 90s in LA. Everybody, your mama is so fat, and all this. She has 2 zip codes and all that. That was never my thing. But I get it why it was popular. But, you don't have to be mean spirited, but people should be able to take a joke. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, speaking of mean spirited and the whole evolution of cancel culture, one of the greatest was Bill Cosby. And I'm not speaking of him in the past tense like he's no longer living, but as a comedian, Bill Cosby ain't on tour anymore. What are your thoughts about his trajectory? What happened with him?
Well, it's kind of a personal subject for me when it comes as a comedian, storyteller, bar none, one of the best storytellers ever. His whole comedy was storytelling, right? He wasn't a Henny Youngman or Rodney Dangerfield punchline setup. He did some of that, but the majority of his comedy, from someone who appreciated his comic sensibilities and what he did in television and all that. But the flip side, I know someone who he raped, who's a dear friend of mine. I know for a fact he did it. And I know what it did to her. I can't speak for all the hundreds and something other victims that came out, but he did drug her and rape her. And she made me and another mutual friend of ours, who I won't name, who's also a comedian, a woman, swear on a stack of Bibles not to ever let the story out because he threatened to, not only ruin her, but ruin her family and this and that. And I saw what it did to her. It destroyed, it changed this woman's life forever. And when these women started coming out, I was surprised when me and the other friend, she was in LA and I was in the Bay Area at the time. We had turned on the TV as Fate Would Have It at the same time and saw her. And I guess she felt so empowered by all these other women coming out to tell her story, because I found out her story when I lived in LA in 1995, and I witnessed firsthand. And she was a beautiful, cool, intelligent woman. Um, she, well, I won't even get into the particulars of it. I'm not here to litigate the case, but trust me, he did it. So I kind of, I have no sympathy for dude, but by the same token, in if I'm gleaning what your question is asking, it shouldn't cancel his contributions to art. It shouldn't cancel his contributions to comedy, and more importantly, television, because the Cosby Show in a different world changed the game, particularly for Black people on television. So I give him all the props and the credits in the world for that. But as a human being, and again, I can't speak for the other 100, however many victims came out, but I know what it did to her.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your response to that question. And as I think about it, I just wonder if it's possible to separate the person from the work, because as you said, A Different World was a phenomenon. That show was responsible for a lot of young Black folk going to college because they saw relevance and the value in it. When you look at his body of work, I mean, I can remember being 7 years old listening to Bill Cosby albums. He would ask questions like, why is there air? Just things that made you think. And then, way back when, and I think I might have a couple years on you, but I remember when it was just such a rare thing to turn on the television and see a Black face. So, he did that show I Spy with Robert Culp. And this is
I
around
remember
the
that.
same time that Diane Carroll was on with Julia. And,
Yeah.
we couldn't believe it. We turned on the black and white set and we saw somebody Black on television and we were excited. But then, that thing called old age comes along and, folks get somewhat or semi-senile and they speak their truths and they don't care how it affects anybody. And so you have all those things that happen to folks in old age. I just, as with everyone, you pray that, things can somehow turn out positive for them. But, it was really tragic what happened with him. And I think the biggest danger that he posed to society in a sense was having a broadcast network. I think that was the thing that probably resulted in him being taken down the way that he was, because, folks in high places, they do all kinds of things that they get away with that never see the light of day. But if you have an agenda that contradicts the agenda of the status quo, then in many ways you will get dealt with. And I think that is what happened to him. So, but again, I really appreciate your response about that. Also, I'm curious about, the person that many consider the greatest of all time, the trajectory that his life took, all the meaningful films that he did. And then I guess it was Parkinson's that he had and his health deteriorated. And he was, he just wasn't the same man that he was after he had all those health issues. Could you reflect on what you observed about Mr. Pryor?
Oh man, first of all, have gotten to know people who were around him a lot. I saw him one time at the Comedy Store when he was sick, and I had to pull the East Oakland to get in there. They were doing this tribute to him, and he was in a wheelchair. And I was not, as much as he meant to me. I remember the Richard Pryor show on NBC. I remember even when I was a little kid, maybe 6 years old, there used to be this show called Hollywood Squares. The first time I ever saw Richard Pryor on TV. And he was one of the stars, and the stars were playing for their favorite charity, right? And he said, I'm playing for the Black Panther Party for self-defense in Oakland. And I was like, what? Who is this dude? Oh, he came, because, the Black Panther Party, I grew up in Oakland. I was a little kid when all that was going on, man. And we revered and loved Huey Newton, Bobby Seale, Elaine Brown, everybody, right? So when I saw this brother, I didn't even know who he was. I didn't know he was a comedian, an actor. I didn't know nothing about him. But I was like, man, I love this dude. Then 1972, and that N-Words Crazy came out. And I was blown away when I heard it. I said, wow, not only is a black man talking all this S, but he's also talking about our culture. He's talking about stuff we see in the community, and he's hilarious, right? So I said, who is? So then I became like, boom, a fan. And right around the same time, I became a big fan of another gentleman who I think is probably, in terms of a comic mind, the most brilliant comic mind that ever walked the earth, and that's the late, great George Carlin. People don't understand. That man did something that nobody has ever done, that maybe Mort Saul did it, I don't know. But George Carlin for 40 years straight, or wherever long it was, came out with a new 90 minutes. Who does that? Who has a whole new 90 minutes every year and then tours it around 200, 300 times a year? So comic genius doesn't adequately describe Mr. Carlin. And one of my regrets is that I never got to see him live. And the one time I was going to see him live in Vegas, my car got towed. So I got waylaid. And I remember after we got the car back, and I just wanted to run to the casino he was at, forget where it was, and just meet him. And I went to the backstage and I asked the guard, I knocked on the door, and he said, man, Mr. Carlin just left 10 minutes ago. And I said, damn, I just wanted to tell him, I was doing comedy by then, what a genius he was. You know what I mean? But Richard Pryor, in terms of black comedy, is the end all be all. I remember, I forget who was it, Keenan Ivory Wayans or somebody said every black comedian after Richard Pryor is doing another version of Richard Pryor. And I don't necessarily disagree. I know if you hear me and see me, you can see a lot of his influence in me. I mean, he just reinvented the whole genre, particularly as it relates to black comedians. So, man, when he started getting sick and all that, and then people were still trotting him out there and everything, I don't know the whole inner workings of what all that was out. But when he was in his heyday, of course, he did a lot of drugs, and that's well documented. It ain't like I'm saying nothing out of school or talking about the brother. But just in terms of comic genius, him and George Carlin are right near the top to me.
Okay. Well, we're going to talk about your genius when we come back. I want you to give us an understanding of your career path, where you started and where you are now. And I'm sure that there are some gems within that. We'll be back with more with comedian Donald Lacy Jr. right here on 95.9 FM WOVU. This is Vince Robinson. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Open Door with Vince Robinson. My guest is comedian Donald Lacy Jr., and he's just told us that two of his favorites of all time were Richard Pryor and George Carlin. And I got to tell you, Donald, I have a great appreciation for George Carlin because he told it like it is.
Yes.
He didn't pull any punches. There are things in life that are just so ridiculous that you have to laugh at them. But he was just so real, and the things that he said so long ago, they're still relevant today. His comedy is timeless.
Yes.
You described what it's like. You start off as an MC, then you become a feature, and you become a headliner, and you can do an hour and 15 minutes or whatever. But you also mentioned that in some places you really only get to do 10 minutes, 10, 15 minutes, unless you are, top of the heap type comedian. Talk about some of the things that you've been able to do and accomplish as a comedian.
Oh, man. It's enabled me to travel all over the world. I'm actually, I just booked today, as we do this, a gig in Ghana where I'm doing an hour. I'm really excited about that, to go over there. Well, first of all, it's my first trip to Africa, and I'm going to go through the door no return. And coincidentally or not, when I get back, I'm doing this play written by Mark Anthony Thompson, who is the longtime collaborator with Roger Guenveur Smith, who, Mark Anthony Thompson is a brilliant composer. He does a lot of the music and soundscapes for all of Roger's shows. They've been collaborating. But he's written his first play called The In Lovers, and it's based on a true story about a light-skinned slave woman who cuts off her hair, dresses like a white man, so that her and her dark-skinned slave husband can escape to freedom to Boston, right? And he's written this farce. It's hilarious play about that true live historical event. So I'm really excited when I get back from Ghana and go through the door of no return and have this meeting with all my ancestors that I'm doing this play that's about slavery and about liberating us from slaveries mentally, physically, spiritually, and every other way. But man, I got a chance to go to Germany in the 90s with my boy Faison Love. We did a tour for the troops over there. I've been to the Far East, Japan, Okinawa, Diego Garcia, Singapore. I've been a lot of places, man. I've been to Paris, and stand-up comedy has allowed me the opportunity. The good news is, and in Hawaii and other places, I'm always working when I go, so I don't have a lot of time to, sightsee and stuff. I get some time. But now I want to go some places, even this Africa trip, I'm going to be there for 12 days and I'm only doing 2 shows. So I got 10 days to just experience the culture, the spirits, the ancestors, and do all my spiritual work. I can't wait to let my feet hit that dirt and practice Qigong. So, man, I'm grateful that acting and stand-up comedy as well has allowed me opportunities to travel and work different places where I might not have had the opportunity to work had I not been, part of the art form.
Well, when you go to Ghana, and you're probably going to land at the airport in Accra.
Yep.
When they take you to the door of no return, there are 2 dungeons down there. There's one in Cape Coast and there's one in Elmina. And I'm hoping that you go to the one at Cape Coast. It's not like one is nicer than the other, but,
right.
but when I was there, I felt more when I felt what I felt when I was in Cape Coast. But when you go to Elmina, there's a resort there called the Coconut Grove. So you definitely need to go to Coconut Grove. There is a beach there that you can plant your feet on and get that feeling. There's a beach outside of the Elmina dungeon as well. So either place, but I'm hoping that you go to the Cape Coast dungeon. And when you're passing by between Cape Coast and Elmina, wave at my folks in Atonkwa, because there's a village in Ghana that has my name on the village registry.
Okay.
Nana Duakwa, so hopefully you'll get a chance to meet Nana Duakwa. So yeah, Ghana is a wonderful place. I know that you're going to enjoy it, and I know that you will be inspired. Another place that you'll need to go is the Kakum Forest. At Kakum, they have a footbridge that's literally a few thousand feet over the floor of the forest. And you have to go way up this hill. It'll probably take you 15 minutes to get up to the top of the hill. And then there's a footbridge that you walk around to different platforms, and you'll be way up there in the air. And it's just a wonderful, wonderful experience.
Nice.
Hopefully you go to Kumasi, because there's a royal palace in Kumasi and a museum there. Bonwire, I think that's how you pronounce it. It's where they make kente cloth. It's one of the only places, if not the only place in the world, where they make kente cloth. And then there's the Adinkra village that's about 15 or 20 minutes away from there. And they have these stamps that you can use to stamp Adinkra symbols on the kente cloth that you purchase for about $10, and you can do your own. So there's a lot to see. I don't know if you'll be long enough there to go.
Send me all of this, bro. I'm glad you telling me this, because I got a couple people over there. A sister I went to college with who's lived there for 15 years, and she's hooked up, the door of no return trip and this overnight thing and a couple other things, and hooked up one of the gigs for me. But yeah, man, please send me all of this, man. I'm gonna try to squeeze every minute out of every day that I'm there, bro.
Yeah. Well, you will find the Ghanaian folks to be very welcoming. You know, they gonna love you, brother. Trust.
I'm looking forward to it,
They
man. In fact, another brother of mine I know from here, who's the tour manager for Tony, right? They've been doing shows there the last 3 or 4 years, and he knows a brother over there. He just purchased him some land for dirt cheap. I'm not saying I'm gonna get it on this trip, but I'm definitely looking into it. And uh, the other reason I'm doing this for a spiritual trip, more than anything for myself. But I'm looking at possibly establishing dual citizenship there. So hey, I don't even want to get into the whole what's going on in America, but you and I when we were roommates in Playa del Carmen, we had long discussions deep into the wee morning hours talking about all this stuff. So I know we can't get into this here, but I'm not no fortune teller. But let's just say I want to have somewhere to go when the what hits the fan.
right. Well, I can tell you that getting dual citizenship is more than a notion. They don't
I, yeah.
yeah, they don't just hand it out willy-nilly, but if you know the right people,
Oh yeah.
then you can get in. And there's also something called the right to abode. So with the right to abode, those of us from the diaspora can go and we can stay for long periods of time and just basically pay a fee every year. So
Huh.
even if you don't get the citizenship, you can stay there for a long period without having it. But there is a benefit to having dual citizenship. And if you're able to get that, I applaud you. I'm thinking about the same thing myself. I have a dear colleague, Dr. Qua David Whitaker, who is also Nana Kra Kwamina II. So he is an Akan chief who happens to be from Cleveland, and he just received his citizenship last year. So, perhaps I can connect you with him, and then maybe you can
Absolutely.
have a conversation about how that could happen for you. So,
Hey man,
so yeah.
be- before we conclude, I know we're running toward the end, but I want to mention someone from your hometown. And I was actually born in Canton, Ohio. For the record, you know this, but your listeners might not. I moved to Oakland when I was less than a year old. But I met this wonderful woman when I was on Fox News about a month ago, if you can believe that, whose 14-year-old daughter was murdered. Her name is Dr. Yvonne Pointer. Do you know her? She's in Cleveland. She
brother,
has.
brother. Yvonne Pointer, Dr. Yvonne Pointer lives 5 minutes from my
I
house.
knew it, and that's why I brought it up. That's my new best friend, man. What a beautiful sister. Me and her, we connected in New York about a month ago when we did that Fox News show. And well, you know her story about the whole thing in Ghana with her and all that. So she's hooking me up with people. She called a brother while we were having dinner in New York over there. He called me the next day, put me on the phone with him, the young man who she was sending money over there, who I don't know if people know. I don't want to tell the whole story and give it away, but you know the story, and it's an incredible story. She's such a beautiful sister. I love her dearly, man. And when you tell her I said hello, I've been texting her back and forth in the last few days. Just a wonderful human being, man. That woman's story is so inspiring to me, man. I just love that lady.
Yes, yes. Well, it just so happens that Dr. Pointer is connected with the village that I told you about,
Oh,
Atonquois.
come on, bro. Look
And
at that.
and the school that's named for her daughter is in that village.
Oh, I was already going there. She was setting that up for me, bro.
Okay, all right. So you going to
Man.
my home, you going to my home away from
And then I'm
home.
gonna see you over there too. See how it works?
Man,
Ah, yes, sir. Oh man,
man,
that's beautiful, bruh.
such a small world. And she is
Yeah,
one of the
man.
she's one of the sweetest people in the world.
Oh, I just adore that woman, man. Just what a she wrote, man. Just and for folks who don't know her story, I'm sure you'll tell it at some point or maybe have a. But when I heard that story, man, I cried like a baby because it just shows the power of the great spirit, for
Yeah.
this woman from Cleveland to have schools and all of that over there, and her beautiful daughter who was tragically, raped and murdered 500 feet from her school. Such to show that something so wonderfully positive to impact thousands of people on the whole other side of the world is just, I get goosebumps just thinking about it.
Yeah. Well, since you brought that up, I want to talk to you about another mission that you have in honoring your daughter, because that can't go unreported in this radio program. And I know back in, I think it was November, you were part of an event that took place, and you put in a lot of work to that. You've gotten a lot of recognition that the folks in the Bay Area definitely know your story. And I want to give you a chance to give us the story as well. So if there's any way that folks in Cleveland can support your mission with that, they'll be able to do so. So why don't we take a pause right here, and then we'll come back and
Yes,
we'll
sir.
talk about that important work that you're doing, because I know that you touched a lot of lives, Donald, and I don't want it to go unrecognized. So we're going to take a quick pause right here, and then we'll come back. You're listening to Open Door with Vince Robinson on 95.9 FM WOVU, Burton Bell Car Community Radio. My guest is comedian Donald Lacy Jr., and he's also an activist, and he does a lot to affect the lives of young people in his community and other places. We'll be right back after this. Welcome back to Open Door with Vince Robinson. My guest is Donald Lacy Jr., a comedian out there in the Bay Area, Cali, as they say, out there. You're hobnobbing with all the celebrities. You know, his boy is Faison Love and Lunel, and probably a whole bunch of other folks who shall go unnamed. But in all seriousness, you've been connected with an event, an agency, a nonprofit agency that is doing work to affect the lives of young people. So give us the background, give us the backdrop of that, and we'll get to how folks can assist you in that mission.
Well, thanks, brother, for asking that question. I've out of my many titles and events in life, one of my favorite titles is father, and my firstborn child was a beautiful young lady, Loisha, which is Igbo in Nigerian and means love life in English. And I gave her that name because I delivered her on the freeway while driving. I had one hand on the wheel, one hand between her mother's legs, pulling her. She dove out on the floor of the car. And right after she came in the car, her mom picked her up. And right then, Stevie Wonder's Isn't She Lovely came on the radio. So I knew right then that this was because of the, incredible circumstances of her birth, that this child was destined for something. Now, I didn't know that it would be tragically intertwined in her destiny, but when she was 16 years old, she was coming from her part-time job at McDonald's, and a friend of hers and the young lady she was with saw them and picked them up and gave them the ride, but they didn't know he had gotten into a fight or dispute earlier, and some cats were looking for this dude. So when the car stopped, she was sitting behind the driver. 4 people followed them for after they picked her up from the time they stopped by her house, and they walked up on the front of the van shooting at him, and he ducked, and she was hit by 7 bullets and killed instantly. But a few months before that tragic night, on October 20th, 1997, a friend of hers was murdered, and she wanted me to help her start an organization. So we started when she was killed. I stopped everything I was doing in Hollywood, put my career on hold for a good 9-10 years. I was doing some work in between, doing a few gigs, a few acting gigs, a few comedy gigs, but we started the LoveLife Foundation. And now here we are in November. We celebrated our 25th anniversary. Man, we've reached, I like to say, while I lost one, I've gained thousands. I mean, so many young people we've helped get to college, support them and get them good jobs and careers. And it's just incredible. In fact, on April 5th, 2016, the Oakland City Council, because of our dedication to young people in Oakland, adopted Love Life, despite opposition from the mayor, I will add, adopted Love Life as the official motto of the city of Oakland. So when you come to my town, Vince, every entering Oakland sign, every one of them, north, east, west, south, anywhere, says love life on them. Not only to honor my daughter's life, who was killed at 16, but to honor anyone whose life was taken for any reason, and to remind us all that the most precious gift we as human beings share is that breath of life. And life needs to be respected and cherished and treat people with human decency instead of randomly killing folk. In fact, the motto of the LoveLife Foundation is love life, don't take life. And if people want to see all the great work we've done, and I will say this finally about that, in 2018, I was given the chance to meet the young man, the one person convicted of murdering my daughter. Christopher Smith is his name. And I was part of a program with Van Jones on CNN called The Redemption Project, where I met him for the first time. And after 4 hours plus of dialogue, I forgave him on camera to, take that burden off myself and him, but also to set an example of forgiveness for other people who have been wrongly, done by others, offended by others, who's had their kids murdered, so that they can heal, hopefully through the power of forgiveness. As Jesus says, he laid on the cross, almost his last words was, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do." And if people want to see all the great work that we've been blessed to do, and all the youngsters, you can go to our webpage, www.lovelifefoundation.org. And hey, man, I can't take all the credit. I've had the ancestors and the powerful spirit working to, do all this amazing work, because until last year, we never had a budget of $100,000. Last year was the first time we had a budget over $100,000. So I don't get paid for that work necessarily, nor do I care to. Most of the money goes to the families and the youth we serve and for the programs we do. But hey, man, I can go to bed at night knowing that my daughter's life and tragic death and afterlife has served a purpose to move human beings forward. So I can rest easy with that.
Okay. What you said folks can make a donation if they go to that website?
Sure. It's love, and it's tax deductible. We are a 501c3, so the government pay for it. Make the government, that's GOMENT, government, pay for it. www.lovelifefoundation.org. All contributions, big or small, are greatly appreciated. And in the words of the prophet, the Honorable Robert Nesta Marley, if you are a big tree, then we are a small axe. And ready, well sharp, ready to cut down injustice, and more importantly, try to reach these young Black men that I mentor. I have so many that I'm blessed, who bless me, by the way. And I always say, and people think I'm blowing smoke, I learn as much as I teach. But to just teach them how to love themselves, love their community, and to act with respect towards each other and love towards each other. So and we teach them media and performing arts, and we put out programs and public service announcements and television and radio that uplifts life and speaks, to garnering a greater appreciation. We don't censor the young people. We let them do their own messages, but the one caveat is it can't be nothing with the B word or the N word or talking about murder or none of that. Other than that, you can say what you want to say.
Okay. I'm curious, Donald, how Christopher Smith received you.
Well, when he walked through the room, and here's the ironic thing about the whole incident. He used to come to the house and play with her when they went to elementary and middle school together. He didn't know, neither did the other three assailants, who was in the back seat. They started following because the windows were tinted on the sides, right? They just saw him driving this van, and he felt guilty. And when she was first killed, we were on the news every day almost. We were doing peace marches, had 1,000 people out there, Jerry Brown, Barbara Lee, Congresswoman, everybody was out there. We had made a big, it touched a nerve in the community because my daughter was a beautiful, loving human being who wasn't in no gang and none of that. And, a week before Christmas, the year she was killed, we had a town hall meeting December 18th, 1997. I'll never forget, in City Hall a week before Christmas. And it was over 800 people there. There was a line outside the block. We were the first community organization in the history of Oakland to be given access to the city council chambers. We sat in the seats where the council members. I sat in the mayor's seat, right? So he was seeing us on TV a lot, and he got locked up a couple of months later on some other charge. I forget what it was. And then he confessed that same year, a couple of days before Christmas, 1997, December 23rd. I got a call at 3 a.m. from the investigator saying, Mr. Lacy, we have a confession. And, I didn't see him. I saw him in court a couple of years later when he went to trial. And he never would look at me or make eye contact. But I always thought at some point I want to meet and sit down with him because, he had a conscience. Because had he not confessed, he wouldn't have done 25 years or however many years he ended up doing. And then, when he walked in the room that day we met for the first time, I have this big picture of her that I'm going to grab real quick that he saw, right? And he broke down crying when he saw her picture, right? So, again, he knew her and loved her. He grew up in the neighborhood. So, he was grateful. And before I met him, actually, he had wrote me a letter saying how remorseful he was that he participated in her death. And, he loved her and he was sorry and this and that. And, so, yeah. And then after we shot the program, before it aired about 6 months after we shot it. I went to his parole hearing, and he had turned his life around. But you got to understand, he was only 16 himself when he went to the penitentiary. He went to San Quentin or right when he turned 18, I believe. I forget where he was prior to that. But, and I petitioned to the parole board for his release. And then about 7 months after that, he was released, and he's still out now. And from what I understand, he's doing the right thing. He hasn't gotten back in trouble.
Okay. I think it would kind of be phenomenal if he was working with you in your foundation.
Yeah, well, I feel like while he hasn't done anything illegal, he's done some things that I'm not at liberty to discuss. That I did my part for him. He's on his own.
Okay. So
I wish him all the best.
Yeah, he may have turned things around, but not completely.
I'll just leave it at that.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll leave that there and then turn the focus to some other things that you're doing. I happen to know that you do a little radio.
Yeah, man. In fact, you got to come on my show, bro. When you going to come on with me?
All you got to do is ask me, bro. It ain't nothing but a phone call.
Yeah. In fact, what you doing tomorrow around 4:15 my time?
I'll have to think about that because I know I got a full plate tomorrow. Oh, I have a meeting at 4 o'clock tomorrow, but that's 4 o'clock your time.
Which is 7 your time.
7 my time. I might be able to swing that.
Okay, let's talk afterwards and we'll figure that out.
Okay,
yeah,
absolutely.
Man, I've been in radio since I was 18.
Really?
In fact, one of the first interviews I ever did at Radio KPO, and I'm working on a documentary film about that station now. I interviewed one of the leaders of the ANC who was right under what's the brother Robert, who was the general of the ANC. His name he was right under him, and a member of SWAPO. Right. And that was at the heart of the apartheid movement. That was in 1978, I want to say. That was the first interview I ever did on radio, man. And I was nervous as all get out, but I did all right. And I got the opportunity to interview some legends, man. Dick Gregory, Angela Davis, Gil Scott-Heron, Phyllis Hyman. I could go on and on and on. McCoy Tyner, rest in peace. Joe Sample, man, just some really great artists and people that I've admired. Nancy Wilson, I got to interview the late great Nancy Wilson. Even Ernest Borgnine, I got to interview him by telephone. Oh, now here's one for you, Vanessa Del Rio.
Oh boy.
I'm about to interview her, man. Wow, that's a whole nother story. But yeah, so yeah, man, radio has always been to me one of just an incredible medium. I love all the mediums I've been able to do, but radio holds a near and dear place to my heart because I grew up in the age of black radio in Oakland, KDIA, Lucky 13, and KSOL, which the great Sly Stone of Sly and the Family Stone used to be a DJ when I was a little bitty kid. Hey, this is Sly Sylvester on your radio, 107.7 KSOL. And we had like black radio. And I always wanted to be on radio when I was a kid because I used to have that. I'm sure you had one of them little transistors. I would go to the ball game and listen to the late, great Bill King. And in between innings, I turn on KDIA and be listening to James Brown. Man, I would get so hurt when my transistor batteries will run dead and the radio would work. So I always love radio, man. It's just a special medium.
Yes. Well, once upon a time, I lived in California and I listened to XPRS radio and the great Wolfman Jack.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
What was that TV show he would do?
The
Remember?
Midnight Special.
The Midnight Special. Oh, I love that show.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we're winding down, Donald. If folks are interested in reaching out to you and finding out more about your comedy career, because we have the LoveLife Foundation.org. But if they're interested in connecting with you and following you in terms of comedy, where can they go?
They can go to www.colorstruckplay.com. And that's coming to TV real soon. I can't say when yet, but just keep an eye out for it. You heard it, colorstruckplay.com. We just had I changed it, updated all the time. We got George Santos in there and Marjorie Taylor Greene and all these freaks. But yeah, www.colorstruckplay.com, or you can hit me DLACY99@yahoo.com, or you can call me 510-1-LOVE. That's the Love Life Foundation number, 510-ONELOVE.
Okay. Well, I can't wait to see that production, man. I know it's going to be phenomenal, and partly because you're in it. Thank you for joining me. It's been a pleasure. It's been a blast, and I look forward to seeing you soon. And I'm sure you're going to love Ghana, brother. Enjoy.
You know, we connected, and you, my brother for life. We was roommates, man. Had a great time out there. And thank you, man, so much for having me. And thank you, all your listeners. Keep supporting my man, Vince. You know what I'm saying? And, man, yeah, we got to talk about Ghana before I get on that plane, bruh.
Oh, for sure, for sure. So with that said, know yourself, love yourself, be yourself. Make today your absolute best day. Peace.
Peace.